Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kalina Shukarova-Savovska, and I'm a Senior Financial Management Specialist at the WorldBank Center for Financial Reporting Reform here in Vienna. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this distance learning event with a focus on integrated reporting. This event is organized under the EU Reparis program and the Audit Training of Trainers activity of the Education and Capacity Development component. It is made possible with the generous financial support of the European Union. We would like to thank the International Federation of Accountants for their significant support with this virtual event and the Audit Trainer of Trainers program. We are also very grateful to the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants for their support with this learning event. The objective of this virtual workshop is to allow participants to gain further insight into integrated reporting, to learn about the important advocacy role that the global accountancy profession has while supporting integrated reporting implementation, and learn about available tools, resources, and examples to help integrated reporting adoption. My colleague Piotr Pizziak, who is joining here from Vienna and is a familiar face from the Training of Trainers program, will provide in a few minutes a brief high-level overview of integrated reporting and cover a few key concepts. We have four distinguished speakers joining us today. We have Stathis Gould, who is IFAC Deputy Director, joining from New York. Mr. Gould holds the Professional Accountants and Business Agenda with IFAC, and as a knowledge lead, a key element of his work is developing thought leadership and guidance in support of finance professionals and their roles facilitating sustainable organizational performance. Before moving to IFAC, he was at the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants and also worked in various roles in private and public sector in the UK. Joining us also from New York is Laura Leka, a technical manager in IFAC's Global Accountancy Professional Support Team. Prior to joining IFAC, Ms. Leka was an audit manager for Grant Thornton, specializing in public sector assurance in the UK, and she also spent a year on secondment to the International Integrated Reporting Council, where she was responsible for managing their public sector and business network programs. IFAC and the Integrated Reporting Council have created an integrated reporting professional accountancy organization network that aims to help encourage more widespread adoption and implementation of integrated reporting, and also to raise awareness of the benefits this approach has for diverse stakeholders. Stathis and Laura will speak to us today about this initiative and also about the important role that PAOS have while promoting and influencing policymakers to adopt integrated reporting. Joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa, is Loshni Naidoo, who is an Integrated Reporting Project Director at the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. Loshni began her career as a chemical engineer and worked for several years in mining and chemicals manufacturing industry. And she moved into the accounting and finance field later, where her focus was on providing integrated reporting and sustainability advisory and assurance solution to a diverse array of organizations. Loshni will share with us today practical examples of how the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants has been instrumental in advocating and influencing policymakers to adopt integrated reporting, as well as supporting the integrated reporting implementation process. We have also Matteo Pozzoli joining us from Florence. Mr. Pozzoli is a member of the Small and Medium Practices Committee of IFAC since January 2017, and before that he was a technical advisor between 2008 and 2014. Mr. Pozzoli collaborates with the professional body in Italy on national and international professional standards research and is a technical advisor at the Corporate Reporting Policy Group of Accountancy Europe, as well as associate professor at the University of Naples. Mr. Pozzoli is a chartered accountant and statutory auditor and has contributed to numerous professional and scientific publications. Matteo will speak to us today about the recent IFAC Small and Medium Practices Committee publication titled Creating Value for SMEs Through Integrated Thinking. He will discuss the benefits of the integrated reporting for SMEs. Last but not least, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague Patrick Kabuya, who is joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa, and who will moderate the sessions today. Patrick, a chartered accountant, is a senior financial management specialist based in Pretoria, South Africa. Patrick is involved in supporting the African countries to strengthen the accountancy profession, corporate governance, and public financial management. Before I hand over to our speakers today, let me give a few technical notes. Participants are joining us either via WebEx connection or through VC connections from the following venues: Tirana, Sarajevo, Pristina, Skopje, Podgorica, Belgrade, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. Participants from other locations and regions are joining us via WebEx. In order to have a successful session, I would like to ask kindly all sides to make sure that their microphones are turned off while not speaking. Participants who are joining via WebEx should make sure that the mute button is on. In case a site is dropped during the session, please redial to join, either through WebEx connection, or seek IT support at your WorldBank venue if you are at a VC connection. Now let me pass over to Piotr, who will provide a few high-level overview of the integrated reporting and will cover a few key concepts of this framework. So Piotr, over to you.
Thank you, Kalina. Considering that integrated reporting, or otherwise called IR, is still a relatively new concept, I will provide in this brief introduction to the session a few basics of what is integrated reporting and what are the key elements of integrated reporting framework. So the reality is that for the vast majority of companies, especially larger companies, in the last 30 to 40 years, that has been a trend that majority of their value have shifted to their non-tangibles. The companies are judged not by the value of property they have, but by the reputation, how creative their products are, and their influence on the society in general. The relationship between a business, its investors, and the society is under scrutiny like never before. Businesses are trapped in the reporting cycles that are short-term focused and are mostly backward-looking. They have a compliance box-ticking mentality, and the reports are getting too long and too complex without telling the holistic story about the entity. As a result, businesses are facing significant compliance burden. Investors are not getting the right information they need. Capital markets are suffering from short-term focus and excessive focus on financial information, and in certain aspects, a lack of trust. However, there is a better way based on stronger dialogue between businesses and investors. This innovative approach is already practiced by thousands of businesses globally. Can we move to slide number 2? The International Integrated Reporting Council, IIRC, is the global authority on integrated reporting. IIRC, previously known as the International Integrated Reporting Committee, was formed in August 2010 and aims to create a globally accepted framework for a process that results in communications by an organization about value creation over time. The IIRC's mission is to establish integrated reporting and thinking within mainstream big business practice as a norm in the public and private sectors. In 2013, the IIRC introduced the International Integrated Reporting Framework. The framework provides the conceptual foundation to help businesses produce new reporting model to enable them to provide concise communications on how they create value over time. The framework is the result of consultation and testing by businesses and investors in all regions of the world. The framework of Integrated Reporting Council has this notion of promoting the idea of integrated thinking, which is understood as the active consideration by an organization of the relationships between its various operating and functional units and the capitals that the organization uses or affects. Basically, integrated thinking is understanding that there is a direct link between the cause and the effect between financial and non-financial elements. Another concept defined by the framework is integrated reporting, which is understood as a concise communication about how an organization's strategy, governance, performance, and prospects in the context of its external environment lead to the creation of value over short, medium, and long term. And the integrated report, which is the end result, specifically describes the value creation story. How this particular organization creates value, not only now, but also intends to create value over time, short, medium, and long term. The goal of integrated reporting is to increase the total sum of value in all areas, and let's stress it, not only the financial value. Integrated reporting builds on what we already have instead of trying to create something completely new. And the evidence shows that it contributes toward financial stability and sustainable development. Next. In accounting reporting, we deal with the efficient use and the return of financial capital. However, there is now recognition that there are other capitals which are equally important, but for which we don't have yet well-established measurement methods. Clearly, there is a lot of ideas how to create value, but how the integrated reporting framework understands and defines values? Well, value is understood and defined under framework in terms of capitals of the organization. And the capitals are divided between tangible and non-tangible capitals. So what the integrated reporting framework has done is identified those capitals, divide them between traditionally tangible capitals, which are financial and manufactured, and non-tangibles, which comprise of intellectual, social and relationship, human capital, and natural capital. So 6 groups in total. Integrated reporting is a process for understanding the links and relationships between them, both financial and non-financial capitals. The framework does not require organizations to use these categories of capital for its integrated reporting. In fact, the message is that organization that uses IR framework should firstly understand what it needs for inputs in capitals and also their impacts. So if these are the capitals, how it works for the organization to create value. Integrated reporting framework also provides a model that organization can use to understand how it creates value. And it begins with understanding its business model. So understanding of its inputs, its activities, its outputs in terms of products and services, and finally, its impacts, or how it has been called in the framework, its outcomes. Because IR framework sees the value in terms of capitals and the changes to those capitals, there is no surprise that the inputs and the impacts are actually in terms of capitals too. They are any combination of financial, manufacturing, intellectual, human, social and relationship, and natural capitals. How the organization creates value is defined by changes in those capitals. Those changes, in reality, are a combination of increases and decreases within the groups of capitals. Also, those increases and decreases change over time. It's not only important to look at the short-term impact, but also consider medium and long-term impact. And finally, there is quite a trend over the last years for stronger promotion on non-financial reporting. Stock exchanges all over the world are leaning for more formalized requirements for both non-financial reporting and integrated reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piotr, for this good introduction to the integrated reporting and the concepts, the key concepts of the framework. Let me now hand over to Patrick in Johannesburg, who will be launching the session and will be moderating the following sessions today. So, Patrick, if you hear me, over to you.
Yeah, Karina, I can hear you, and thanks, Piotr, for the introduction. Good afternoon to those who are participating from Europe, and good morning to Stathis and Laura from the US. I'm here with Loshni, and as I mentioned earlier, we're looking forward to this engagement and discussion. I'm sure we can't see all of you, but for those who can see us on the screen, we look forward. We are going to have a test at the end of this session, so I need to come up front, so let's be prepared. It's going to be an easy test though. Karina knows about me. I come from a country called Kenya. I don't know how many of you know Kenya, and I always do this most of the time. My grandmother taught me well, said I need to teach people how to greet in my language. Yes, you can't respond, and we always use the word jambo. So I want you to write. So I'm giving you the answer already. Jambo. So I'm sure you can't see me, but I want you to write that, and I will test you later on to see whether you understood how we greet from my country. So this session, as alluded to earlier, is on integrated reporting, and especially mainly on the role of the accountancy profession. The majority of you participating in this session are from the profession, and it's a good realization that we, as the accountants, need to have a critical role in this reform, especially in three areas: in advocating integrated reporting, influencing the policymakers to adopt integrated reporting, and more specifically also supporting the implementation within the companies in the countries that we are reflected there too. And we are lucky that the organizations that represent the accountancy profession, IFAC, which majority of us are from, has taken this very seriously, and they are leading the way. So we are going to have a session or presentation from both Stathis and Laura to share with us briefly on what is IFAC doing as far as this agenda is concerned. And initially, just to give us a snapshot of why or what IR is, yes, to add to what Piotr has spoken to us about. I understand majority of you participating have not gone through this process before, so Stathis will give us a bit of that highlight. What is important as far as the accountancy profession, or what role the accountancy profession can play in advocating, influencing, and supporting the profession, and of importance, what IFAC has done, what initiative have they introduced, and what type of resources do they have. And I'm guessing at the end of that, you'll have a good understanding and have a bit of knowledge, information, and resources that you can use to do the same within your respective countries. And then we'll dive to listen to my colleague sitting with me, Loshni from SAICA, have been involved in those three areas as far as South Africa is concerned, and she will share that with us, so she can provide us with specific and practical experiences of what the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants have done. We'll give them an opportunity to share their presentation, at least 30 minutes from Stathis and Laura, and at least 20 from Loshni, and thereafter we'll open it up to questions. So I will ask all of you to note your questions as we go along the presentations, and at the end then we'll open up and we look forward to hearing areas you need clarification, or secondly, in case you have some experience that you'd like to share with the group, we'll also be open to it. But I want to position as a rule that we be very concise in our interventions. So without wasting a lot of time, let me invite Stathis to share and Laura to share their presentation. And I'm hoping, Karina, you project that on the screen. Thank you. And remember to mute if you're not listening.
Thank you, Patrick. Jambo, Patrick. Thank you for your kind introduction.
Well done, you got it.
I've got it. Very, very kind of you, and I think this is a great opportunity to discuss integrated reporting with a region that we typically haven't engaged very much with in recent years. So we really welcome this, and thank you to the World Bank for organising this with our other partners. And I think it's an important opportunity to discuss integrated reporting, given the many activities and things that are going on in that non-financial reporting space. Just in the European context, we have the EU non-financial reporting directive, of course, and many of you may be aware of the climate-related financial disclosures recommendations that came from the Financial Stability Board's task force. We have the Sustainable Development Goals that many of you will be familiar with, and other activities in this non-financial reporting space. So I think it's an important opportunity to understand how integrated reporting has a lot of potential to enhance the whole reporting space, given all these other developments. And as Patrick quite rightly said, this is a really important moment, if you like, for the accountancy profession, enabling us, I think, to move beyond the financials, managing, reporting, and assuring on all the key aspects of value creation, all those key aspects that are really important to organizations on their journey to deliver value to their funders and to other stakeholders over time. So not only in the short term, but in the medium and long term as well. So I think it's a mechanism, a way for accountants and the profession to play in this non-financial space, and also to connect the financial and the non-financial world together. And also, as Peter said, it's not just about, it's a multi-capital perspective. It's not just about the environmental or social aspects. It's covering all of the critical aspects of an organization. So I think that's a very important point. So if you move on my slide, please, Kalina. Laura and I are just going to talk about why IFAC sees integrated reporting as important, where we're at with integrated reporting, the role of accountancy bodies, and some useful resources for PAOs. So if you can move to the next slide, we'll cover the policy position that IFAC put out, and the next slide, please. The policy position we put out about a year ago on corporate reporting. And this is, I think, the right place to start. I think the context here that's very important to understand is that IFAC has a strategic partnership with the IRC. So we are members of the IRC Council. We supply a lot of intellectual input into the thinking of the IRC, and currently Laura is actually on a part of her time is seconded to help the IRC technical agenda. So I think it was an important moment a year or so ago that we actually issued a policy position related to corporate reporting and the specific role of integrated reporting in that system. And the policy position provides a clear direction, I think, for corporate reporting, and supports IR as an initiative that can both improve reporting and, very importantly, really be a means to encourage longer term behaviour in the capital markets based on a wider view of value creation. So going beyond just share value, thinking about making decisions in the context of share value, value maximisation. So as was mentioned earlier, the impetus for this whole movement partly was derived from this current reporting system that we have, which I think is everybody would acknowledge is quite fragmented, with numerous reporting frameworks, standards and disclosure requirements for different purposes, and each covers different aspects of the 6 capitals, if you like, that are in that multi-capitals model. And in supporting integrated reporting, I think it's very important to mention that, you know, financial reporting remains and will be continue to be the bedrock of reporting going forward. But of course, financial reporting has its limitations, which we'll discuss through this learning opportunity. And the other problem, of course, with reporting is a lot of reporting is very compliance focused and quite boilerplate, so it doesn't really give a holistic understanding of the performance of the organisation from a wider strategic business model perspective. So the policy position explicitly stated, as you'll see on the slide here, that IR is the way to achieve a more coherent reporting system, fulfilling a need for a single report that provides a fuller picture of an organisation's ability to create value. And the IRC, the International Integrated Reporting Framework, has a set of principles and concepts that Peter referred to, but there are others in the framework that enable one to construct an integrated report that provides that holistic view of an organisation and its performance. But I would say that it's also important to note, I think, that there are different approaches to achieving integrated reporting that are emerging, and that the production of a separate integrated report in line with the requirements of the international IR framework is not the only way of achieving integrated reporting. There are companies and organisations that are applying the principles of integrated reporting to existing forms of reporting, whether that be a management report, whether it be a regulated, form of narrative reporting, which could be an MD&A or a strategic report or an operating and financial review. So a lot of companies are also thinking about how to apply the principles and concepts of IR to existing reports. But I'll go into that relationship between IR and other reporting forms in a moment. So I think next slide, please, Kalina. So one of the important, I think, background to what's going on in the political world as well as the business world, I think, is captured in the PR, one of the world's biggest PR firms, Edelman, that runs an annual trust barometer, and you can see that one of the key issues around trust is that 56% of people think companies only think about themselves and their profits, and that these companies are bound to fail with that perspective. And 60% of CEOs are driven more by greed than a desire to make a positive difference in the world. So this suggests, and the trust barometer that's been going on for many years now, is these numbers are only been going down over recent years, which really indicates we're at a crossroads in terms of public trust. So really, IR, I think, is a means to support, to change these statistics, to really support organisations make capital allocation decisions and have a mindset change that supports financial stability and sustainable development that ultimately builds trust in business and the accountancy profession. So these outcomes, importantly, are in both the public and private sector interests, and are in line to IFAC's vision, which is that the global accountancy profession be recognised as a valued leader in the development of strong and sustainable organisations, financial markets and economies. So really, IR is very much a centrepiece of achieving our vision. And ultimately, if you think about how organisations are managed and how investors and funders look at organisations, most of the risks that are being managed and dealt with in organisations are at their root non-financial. So it is very important, I think, to if you're going to understand, manage and maximize, your effectiveness in risk management, that you really understand and get to grips with those sources of non-financial risk and opportunity. Next slide, please, Kalina. So let's just look quickly at where we are at with integrated reporting. Next slide. I'll talk very briefly about the global and the European situation. We have, I think, the top line figure that the IRC is using. There are over 1,500 organisations doing integrated reporting, but the way they are doing integrated reporting does vary. As I mentioned before, some have an annual integrated report. Some have an integrated report that's layered on top of lots of other reports. Some use the IR principles and apply it to existing forms of reporting. The important thing, though, is that the IRC and the whole integrated reporting movement is what is in a breakthrough phase. And I think since the whole concept of IR was formed in 2010, the last few years has been really trying to communicate and advocate an understanding and an appreciation of the importance of integrated reporting. And we now see, many pioneer companies experimenting and really understanding how they can use integrated reporting, and then the integrated thinking that comes from that to benefit their own organisation as well as the reporting. So we're really at a breakthrough phase. And in fact, at the IRC Council meeting last week in Tokyo, the IRC and its coalition stakeholders were talking about going into the next phase of building momentum around the world, because quite clearly we're a long way from global adoption, and we've not reached that global adoption phase. But what's quite interesting is the fact that in some countries there has been really a very strong, if you like, momentum, and almost reaching, or indeed in the case of Japan, kind of reached a critical mass of adoption. And so I would say those countries are few, but it's quite interesting to look at the characteristics of what's happening in those countries like Japan, where there has been a top-down push, I think, politically, and although perhaps not a regulatory requirement, a regulatory endorsement and encouragement of integrated reporting as a way of enhancing corporate governance and improving transparency and accountability. And of course, Japan is a good example of a country that has had a period of stagnant growth. It's had some corporate governance challenges, and it's seen IR as an important way of helping to solve those problems. And so it has led to many, almost all of their listed companies experimenting with IR. And this is really good news. Although we should also recognise that the quality of some of those reports still is not always consistently of a high standard. So that's something that I think has to be dealt with in the next phase. And another really important statistic is that 83% of CEOs, CFOs, and other directors surveyed in recent reports believe that adopting IR helps deliver success to their organisation. So it's really important, I think, that the leadership of an organisation see integrated reporting and the improvements that arise from reporting in terms of thinking, that I will talk about in a minute, are actually of benefit to the organisation and how it makes decisions, how it engages with its stakeholders and its employees, and it doesn't just become another reporting exercise or reporting process, because if it turns out to be the latter, it doesn't benefit anybody. And also, we have 2,000 or more people participating in various IR networks, which really indicates a good interest in IR. And these networks cover, of course, accountancy bodies, it covers businesses, it covers academics and investors, and there's also a technology network. So there's lots of networks and special interest groups that the IRC houses or homes or helps to run with its partners, and that I think is really encouraging a lot of engagement with the whole IR movement. So one thing that I would say about the global momentum is that we have got a long way to go in some key capital markets like the US and China, and there is good news coming from those markets, but there is a long way to go, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So next slide, please, Kalina. So let's look at momentum of integrated reporting in Europe, because we're all Europeans. Really, this is a European focus, I think, for this learning session. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have, let's start with the European Commission's non-financial reporting directive. I think that's the most important place to start, given that is now sort of live. Now, the important thing is that the Commission did recognise integrated reporting as a step ahead, actually. That's the words they used. A step ahead of its directive on non-financial reporting. So they recognise IR as an important vehicle to use to implement the reporting directive. The directive focuses on environmental, social and governance related disclosures. So it's a little bit more of a narrow scope. It doesn't cover all of the capitals. But the important thing here is that I think integrated reporting helps to place those disclosures in a strategic context, and in the context of the business model, because we're in danger again with these kinds of requirements to have more disclosures of KPIs, more siloed reporting, so more social and environmental disclosures, which, you know, can be helpful, but unless they're in a context of what's going on in the business, they're not. Their potential value to both the organisation and their investors and stakeholders is limited. So the guidelines on non-financial reporting from the EU, which were released last year, help companies to report under the requirements of the directive. And so if you look at the guidelines, there are clear similarities between its key principles and the guiding principles in the IR framework. So the guidelines recognise the importance of linkages and interrelations of information, so that connectivity between different aspects of non-financial information as well as financial and non-financial information. So that connectivity and breaking down silos in reporting is an important feature of the directive and its guidance. The non-financial statement in the guidance is also meant to be concise. It's meant to avoid clutter and immaterial information. So they're not in delivering this directive. The EU is not intending to have encourage boilerplate compliance-based reporting. So that's very important. And the statement is really meant to provide insights into our company's strategy and business model, and to explain how these different areas of environment, social and governance support the organisation's value creation over time. So there's clearly some similarities between the EU non-financial reporting directive and IR. Then in UK is a good example of a country, and it's not the only country. I only pick it out because they're quite a long way down the road on this journey of having a management report, which they call in the UK the strategic report, which is a requirement by the UK's regulator, the FRC. They have been quite vocal in saying that the strategic report should be aligned to integrated reporting. Well, some people would say that there is very almost 100% alignment. I think there's not quite 100% alignment. A lot of the principles and concepts of IR are embedded in the strategic reporting requirements, but they're not all there. But certainly I think we're seeing an increasing number of companies using integrated reporting to implement the strategic report requirements in the UK. So I think for many countries like the UK, so you know, Canada, the US, many European countries all already have existing regulatory forms of management reporting, and so that may be you know, when you're thinking about building momentum and adoption in a particular jurisdiction, it's important to consider how far the IR principles and concepts are embedded in those forms of reporting. In the Netherlands example, I think is very important, because this is a country where you have a high level of momentum. You have over a third of the Dutch listed companies working towards integrated reporting. But the learning point here is that the Dutch, like a number of other jurisdictions, have reviewed and updated their corporate governance code and their corporate governance best practices, and that's important because, like I said before, IR is just not a reporting initiative. It's really about changing behaviours and mindset. So the board and the directors and the management team think about those other aspects of their decision making and their business model that can ultimately impact their ability to create value over time. And that could be anything from, you know, talent and people, and it could from relationships to supply chain to climate change. It covers you know, manufacturing based capital. It covers the whole thing. So to think about all of those really important areas that are relevant to that organization. And the corporate governance code in the Netherlands has recently been revised to require directors to have a longer term perspective in their decision making, and to think about their decisions today in the context of the longer term success of the company. And there's a number of corporate governance codes now around the world where that change is occurring, and I think that really, once that change occurs, it's really helpful to support the integrated reporting movement, because you need that longer term perspective in the minds of company directors to make integrated reporting work properly. And then just covering very quickly some other countries in Europe, you know, France, there's been some momentum. In Germany, there's been some momentum, and as well we have Italy. And I think one of the important things here is that in these countries you don't have large-scale adoption, but you have a good number of companies really flying the flag and pioneering, and I think all of them are really reporting what benefits they're getting from going down this IR journey. And indeed some of them you know, also talk very usefully around the impact it's had on their own finance and accounting function, and the finance and accounting professionals working in their businesses, because with an IR implementation, what the expectations of a finance and accounting function changes from, you know, giving us information and controls and everything else around financial reporting. They also need the finance function and accounting function to be able to talk about value creation, which is a leap in mindset and capability to talk about value creation, not just about financial performance. Next slide, please, Kalina.
Stathis, 15 minutes, please. So just
yes, sir. I will. Yes, and Laura has to speak for 15 minutes as well, so I'll be quick here. So I think a lot of people ask whether there's research that indicates what the benefits are of integrated reporting. We've got three very important sources here which show, which have really connected to integrated reporters who have talked about how they have benefited from reporting. I won't go through all the benefits now because you can read these reports yourself, but you'll see some common themes coming through all of them, and some of the really important benefits are the improved integrated thinking and the connectivity that the board and management are able to achieve, looking at different areas of their business model in the context of their strategy and the trends affecting the organisation. They really get to understand better, what are those things, those really critical things that they need to think about, to manage, to measure, to understand better, to improve their business model, and the way they're going to drive value, and ultimately financial value, but value to others over time. So next slide. These reports also usefully talk about some of the challenges, because of course there are challenges with integrated reporting, and these include things like aligning integrated reporting with the internal management systems that are used for reporting, that many companies of course have to measure their performance internally, and then connecting those internal systems to the external reporting. Really, integrated reporting should lead to a closer alignment between internal and external reporting. If it doesn't, I would suggest there was something wrong. Some other important challenges, I think, are really around the reliability and accuracy of non-financial information. And I would say for a lot of companies, the important thing is that you don't solve these problems within one reporting cycle. It takes time to get some of the data and the analysis and have confidence in some of the information around some of these other capitals. And understanding the relationships between different capitals is very difficult. These are some of the challenges, again, which you can read about in these research reports. Next slide. I just want to spend a moment on how integrated reporting fits in the corporate reporting landscape, because this is often one of the big questions. There's so much going on in the reporting landscape. How does it all fit together? Well, there are several ways of looking at this. I think, as we've put in our policy position, we have a fragmented corporate reporting system. We have lots of different frameworks, voluntary frameworks, disclosure requirements, etc. And the framework, the IR framework, is principles-based. It doesn't suggest metrics or indicators. It doesn't tell you how to measure particular types of capital. There are other reporting standards and frameworks that can support the evaluation of different aspects of the capitals, the non-financial areas. So at one level, an integrated report can be an organisation's primary report, providing greater connectivity between the different underlying reports. So you'll see in the picture here we have the representation of an umbrella, or you can use an octopus with its 8 tentacles. It doesn't really matter, but the point is that I think for larger organisations which are more complex and diverse, they may have several business models and various business lines, and and lots of different requirements as they're listed companies or large private companies. One report format probably won't meet the needs of all stakeholders. So I think if you look at a number of integrated reporters that are large companies, they still have their regulatory filings, and they still have their required reports that they produce, but they use integrated report as an overlay to really extract what are the key areas in the strategic context, in the context of what their business model is, in the context of what's going on in the external environment. They really use integrated reporting as a way to concisely communicate that holistic picture of how the organisation, how it all fits together, and how the organisation is actually going to be fit for purpose and sustainable over time. And you'll see that, like Itaú Unibanco, the largest bank in Brazil, is a great example of a financial services company that has 500 pages of regulatory disclosures going into the SEC, you know, and it's all very difficult to understand the organisation. They have a 60-page integrated report that overlays that to really bring together that story of value creation, so in a way that people can understand and access. But for other organisations, smaller organisations, for example, an integrated report might suffice as their main reports, so, and their main form of strategic communication with their funders or with potential funders. So for some organisations, an integrated report can work as their main report. So I think it really depends on the context that you're in and the kind of business that you are and what your size is as to how integrated reporting is going to actually play out. Next slide, Kalina. So I think I'm going to pass over to Laura now, who's going to speak for about 15 minutes, and she's going to look at some of the priorities on the technical agenda, because like I said, Laura is now involved in supporting the IRC and helping their technical agenda move forward, and also talk a little bit about our accountancy body network and why IR is important for PAOs and what PAOs can do.
Over to you, Laura.
Jambo Patrick, good morning, good afternoon to you all.
Good, you got it. Jambo.
Delighted to be able to participate in this session with you all today. As Stathis said, I'm just going to start with talking through some of the IRC's priorities and their technical agenda. I think Stathis has already covered the various stages of their strategy and that they're currently implementing strategy. So just to give you a little bit of background on their technical agenda at the moment. So last year they had a 2-month consultation period and a sort of implementation framework feedback exercise, just to get feedback from those around the world using the framework as to how it stacks up against the needs of the market. And it's the framework was released in December 2013, so it was really just taking a step back to get feedback now that organisations are using the framework to see kind of what are the challenges with it, and if any further guidance is needed to kind of support those implementing the framework. So it was really just to inform their technical programme and respond to market needs, and it's also just to inform their strategy and their policy work, etc. So they engaged with about 19 economies around the world. They held sort of roundtable events, and I think they had sort of 300 plus participants in those. And that resulted in 77 formal submissions with feedback on the framework. And these are all summarised in a document that you can see on the screen there. And then this has been what has shaped their technical agenda going forward. So I think the consensus was that there wasn't a need at the moment to revise the framework itself. It was more about providing guidance to support some of the common misconceptions or the challenges with the framework. So there are sort of 3 areas that are listed on the slide there. So, excuse me, sorry. So they have the need for further guidance. So as a starting point, a getting started guide as to how one might begin the integrated reporting journey. Materiality is often one of its guiding principles that's sort of commonly misunderstood or misapplied, and the concepts of the multiple capitals and value creation and what that means, and the business model outputs and outcomes of the confusion between what is an output versus what is an outcome, and you have sort of people using the terms incorrectly or interchangeably. and then just to have a summary of the framework requirements as to what is needed for a report to say that it's in accordance with the International Integrated Reporting Framework. And then they have, that we're developing at the moment, a set of frequently asked questions, and that's what I'm working with them on at the moment. So that's really just to have some short sort of questions and answers to get into some of the difficulties and just trying to simplify some of the concepts to make it easier to understand. So at the moment we're developing some about integrated reporting that covers the fundamentals and the basics of what integrated reporting is, and then going into some of the technical topics like materiality and multi-capitals as a starter. So they should be coming up in the next couple of months. They should be going live on the IRC's website, and then additions to the questions will be every sort of month or so. There will be a new topic added to the frequently asked questions. And then I think the framework exercise also highlighted the need for more research. And so this is things like the use of narrative and non-financial information by providers of financial capital, as an example, corporate reporting developments globally, and what are the incentives and barriers to the implementation of IR, and also looking at implementation by SMEs, public sector and not-for-profits. So some of this work is going to be undertaken in-house by the IRC, and some of it will be in collaboration with partners and others. It's quite a full program of work, and it is quite ambitious, but they have a framework panel that advises on kind of the development of these materials, and that meets every couple of months to provide sort of feedback and to guide the process. So that's it for the technical agenda at the moment. And I would say that there are going to be some publications, frequently asked questions, things going up on the IRC website over the next few months. So I would definitely encourage people to look out for those as they come up. If we could go to the next slide, please, Galina. Okay, so now I'm just going to cover what is the role of the PAOs in integrated reporting and how can you support and advocate its adoption. So if we go into the next slide again. So to start with, I'm just going to give an overview of our integrated reporting network for professional accountancy organisations. So we launched this in 2016 in conjunction with the IRC, and it is exclusively for staff and volunteers at professional accountancy organisations. And the idea of it is to support the exchange of ideas, knowledge, experience and resources between PAOs. And that could be PAOs that are producing their own integrated reports, or it's ways in which PAOs are supporting their members to produce integrated reports. So we run a series of quarterly webinars now in over some topics that we've covered and we plan to cover in the future in a moment. And then we also have developed some resources for PAOs, and again I'll talk through those as we go through. So I think importantly it's looking at some of the opportunities and challenges in facilitating the adoption of integrated reporting, promoting market awareness, influencing the regulatory environment. So it's kind of also looking at perceptions of preparer organisations and other key stakeholders, and kind of bringing all that together and then discussing between PAOs, and learning from each other as they sort of promote integrated reporting. So next slide, please, Galina. So this just gives you a summary of some of the topics that we've talked about so far in our quarterly webinars. So since it launched in 2016, we've had webinars on assurance and integrated reporting. We've looked at some individual country perspectives. So we've had Brazil, Canada, Japan, Malaysia, Netherlands, the UK. I think there are some other examples as well. So it's been a mix of how was integrated reporting adoption like in various countries. There was a webinar that's focused specifically on PAOs that are implementing their own integrated reports, and we had 5 PAOs that were producing their own reports just to share their experiences of what they've learned through their IR journey and how they've used that to help their members. I think there's been some there's been sessions on technology and IR adoption, and I think there'll be more of that in the future as well as technology evolves and looking at the relationship between producing an integrated report and how can you use technology to support that. And then if going on to future topics, these are based on a survey that we did of our PAO network as to what they would like to see in future webinars. So the next one is actually next week, and we're going to cover how does IR relate to other forms of reporting. And then for future ones, we're going to start looking at how does it fit in with local reporting requirements and culture. And then again, looking at SMEs, public sector, not-for-profits. And then I think it was quite a strong call for more examples and case studies of sort of strengths and weaknesses in published integrated reports. And what does good look like in terms of integrated reporting. So if we go to the next slide, please, Galina. Okay, so this is just ways in which PAOs can support and advance IR. So, I mean, I think quite importantly, PAOs often have an influence with regulators, with policymakers, with stock exchanges. So it's really about encouraging alignment of integrated reporting to existing requirements for annual reporting in local jurisdictions as a way to support implementation, or as maybe a more pragmatic solution to get integrated reporting momentum in a jurisdiction. And then also to promote the need for global consistency and convergence of organisational reporting. We've got their establish, run and contribute to multi-stakeholder or national regional groups and networks. And there are examples of that at the moment. So there's the Indian IR Lab, there's the IRC of South Africa, there's the Business Reporting Leaders Forum in Australia, the Brazilian IR Network, and I believe, Patrick, there's the newly formed Africa Integrated Reporting Committee that I understand that you'll talk about a little bit later. So there are just different ways of convening the different stakeholders in a country, in a region, to talk about integrated reporting and how do you get that on the agendas. Looking at advocating through written content, conferences, event forums, agendas, engaging with investors and with report users. I think for IR to be successful, it does need an investor pool. But then we also need to understand for the report users what they want from an integrated report, what do they need in terms of their reporting needs. So I think it's important to understand that and see how IR fits in with that. And as I've already said, producing an integrated report themselves, that's a great way for PAOs to sort of lead by example, so that, you know, they can, if you understand the challenges that come along with implementing integrated reporting, and you can share those and share lessons learned with members, that sort of gives it a little bit more credibility. And then lastly on this, we have research and curriculum content. I think it's, I think that, you know, the CFOs and finance functions, they will have a big role to play in the implementation of integrated reporting. So the PAOs have kind of a responsibility to ensure that their members are fully equipped with the skills, the competencies they need in order to support implementation of integrated reporting. So there's a big role there to play. And that's for members coming into the profession, students coming into the profession, as well as qualified members. And how do you sort of keep up the skills needed through CPD requirements? So next slide, please, Galina. Okay, so this is a summary of, this was our survey of the PAO network. So we had respondents, I think it was 85 respondents from over 50 countries responded to our survey. And this just gives you an idea of the kinds of activities related to integrated reporting that PAOs are already undertaking at the moment. I think it's quite encouraging to see that the majority of PAOs are doing some form of, or undertaking some form of IR related activities. I think there are only 12% there that are yet to start. I think some of the main ones are the inclusion of integrated reporting in conferences and agendas, and the participation in local IR networks was a common one, as well as engagement with regulators, policymakers and others. So I think there was quite a low response for engaging with investors, which was quite interesting because, as I said before, I think for IR to become mainstream, it will need a pull from investors. So next slide, please, Galina. Okay, this was quite an interesting one, and again, this comes from our survey. And the question was that how would you describe integrated reporting in your country? Now, the results here are listed by respondent, but it is interesting to note that we had respondents from the same country give completely different answers. So, as an example, in Australia, we had 6 respondents from Australia. 1 said that it was approaching critical mass, 2 said it was moving towards critical mass, 2 said it was gaining momentum, and 1 said that they were just getting going. So it's interesting to see that within a country itself, there are different perspectives as to how is integrated reporting, also what is the level of integrated reporting adoption. And I think it's quite interesting that there are these different perceptions as to, and I think that the challenge with it is how do you define success of integrated reporting implementation? There's different ways to look at it. So I think Stathis already mentioned earlier about the UK strategic report, and some would view that is a success in terms of integrated reporting because of its alignment with the framework. Whereas if others were looking at success of integrated reporting in terms of the number of reports that say that they're an integrated report, then you view success differently, and then the perception there is different. So I think it's a challenge for the IRC to define actually what does success look like, because you have different forms of reporting, that some that use the framework but don't reference the framework. You've got some that say that it's an integrated report but doesn't fully align with the framework. So it's quite hard to judge what is success in terms of integrated reporting. But I did think it was interesting to note that people within a country had different views as to how would they describe integrated reporting in their countries. Next slide, Galina.
Laura, please 5 minutes more because I'm running too late on time. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, actually, I always do the rest. This one was about does your PAO produce an integrated report? And interesting, at the moment, 10% said yes, they do, but then encouragingly, and a further 39% said they don't yet, but they plan to within the next 2 years. Some of the feedback that we got for those that don't produce an integrated report or are not planning to within the next couple of years, some of it was the typical limited resources, both in terms of financial and manpower. Some of it was that at the moment they're currently transitioning to IFRS. So at the moment they're concentrating on that before they then look at sort of non-financial reporting and integrated reporting. There were quite a few that although they don't produce their own integrated report, are encouraging their members to do so and are undertaking IR-related activities. So that was quite encouraging. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly talk through some of the resources that we've got at the moment for PAOs. Next slide. So this is a question and answers document that we published last month, and it covers some of the common issues that have been raised by PAOs and by others in terms of integrated reporting. So some of the common questions are listed there. So how does integrated reporting differ from and relate to other reporting frameworks? How does it fit in the corporate reporting landscape? And then looking at what is value in the context of an integrated report, how can the multi-capitals approach be made more practical and help organisations to capture all relevant aspects of value creation, and then looking at how adaptable is the framework and can it be implemented by organisations. So that is available on our website at the moment, and it's to kind of help answer some of those common questions. Next slide, please. Okay, and we have our Global Knowledge Gateway, and there is quite a lot of content on there related to integrated reporting. So I've just highlighted a few examples here. I'd encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to have a look at the article on the Walk the Talk on integrated reporting, and that just summarizes the webinar that I mentioned earlier, and kind of gives the experiences of 5 PAOs who have been producing their own integrated reports and the lessons that they've learned from that. There are other articles that cover, how integrated reporting fits in with the role of finance professionals, what the role of the finance function is in integrated reporting, looking at SMEs and I think also understanding the business model. So there are various articles out there. I encourage you to have a look on the Gateway, and there are related to integrated reporting on there. So next slide, please. So we've developed some PowerPoint presentations that can be downloaded and used by professional organisations, and they've got limited design formats, so you can add your own template, your own branding. It was just really they're scripted, and you can use those as they are. It's just to help you when you're kind of communicating with your members. So there are four slide decks available. So we've got an integrated reporting overview, and that just gives you an introduction to IR, its core elements. And it also gives an overview of who is the IRC and their mission, vision, etc. We have integrated reporting and investor benefits, and that looks at what are investors asking for, and how can IR help meet the needs of investors. Integrated reporting momentum, that sort of expands on what Stathis was looking at earlier on the momentum of integrated reporting, and that covers the momentum by country and by region. And then lastly, we have one on creating value with integrated thinking and reporting, and what is the role of the finance professional. And this is based around a publication that IFAC put out with the same title. So they are available to download on our website, and the link is there, and PAOs are welcome to use those as they wish. Next slide, please. And just to finish up from me then, it's just that if anybody would like to join our network for PAOs, we have a LinkedIn forum. The link is there if you request to join that. We have a web page on our website dedicated to the PAO network. We have some further resources that are on our extranet, and you would need a login for that. So please contact Jasmine if you're interested in any of those resources. And as I mentioned before, we have a webinar next week that looks at how IR relates to other report forms. We've got a perspective from the UK, we'll have a perspective from Germany, and the IRC will also provide an update on their strategic priorities for 2018 and an overview of their recent events in Tokyo. So that was all from me, and I'll hand it back over to you, Patrick.
Good. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Stathis. And I guess we can applaud you for the good presentation. I hope everyone joins you. Given us a very good caption of why IR, told us what you guys are doing in IFAC, and a good list of available resources. So now I want to shift the tact to my colleague from SAICA, Loshni, to share with us practically what the South Africa Institute of Chartered Accountants have been doing in this reform. And after her interventions, then we can open up for questions, comments, and your input from participants. Loshni, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Good day, everyone. So I joined SAICA in the beginning of January 2017, and my focus was really initially integrated reporting. But what we quickly realized is that to develop a good report or produce a good report, an understanding of the underlying concepts within the framework and a wider, broader understanding of social and environmental impacts are important. So we broadened my role to look at other areas that you would consider non-financial. But for the scope of our discussion today, I'm just going to focus really on the journey, the gaps, and some of the challenges that we are still experiencing around integrated reporting and integrated reports in the country. Next slide, please, Kalina. So I'm going to take you through the South African journey. And it's really a story about governance and not about an integrated report and integrated reporting. But this is how the whole concept of an integrated report began. So in 2009, the King Report of Corporate Governance for South Africa was released, the King 3. And SAICA has been part of the King Committee since its inception, and we continue to play a role in shaping the corporate governance dialogue in the country. So one of the recommendations of King 3 was for organizations to issue an integrated report. And momentum started taking place when our stock exchange became involved in the process and made the application explaining King 3 as part of its listing requirements. So what that meant was that any company planning or intending listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange had to apply or explain the King 3 principles, which promoted the issuance of an integrated report. Now, at that stage, there weren't any guidelines for companies on what exactly an integrated report is or should be. So a number of organizations came together, and the four of them, and SAICA was one of those founding members. The other was the JSE, the Stock Exchange, the Institute of Directors in Southern Africa, the Association for Savings and Investment, and Business Unity South Africa. So they formed a body which is called the Integrated Reporting Council of South Africa, which still exists, and we're still an active organization in the country promoting integrated reporting and integrated reports. So in January 2011, the Integrated Reporting Committee of South Africa issued draft discussion paper on an integrated report. At that point, that was the only guidance out there to try and help companies put together an integrated report. Now, globally, in the meantime, you have His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who has been a strong advocate for environmental and social protection and disclosure by corporates. So in 2004, he formed the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability project, and the Prince began hosting annual conferences promoting environmental protection and social disclosure. So at one of these meetings at St. James's Palace, he challenged the accounting profession and leading business people to address environmental, social injustices and issues in corporate reports. As a result of this, the International Integrated Reporting Council, the IIRC, was established in 2010. And in December 2013, the IIRC published the International Integrated Reporting Framework, or the Framework. So this is 3 years of work with a number of organizations, which SAICA is also a part of. So really, our journey was about governance and talking about governance and trying to change the governance culture in the country that saw us moving towards what we now see as integrated reporting and integrated report. Next slide, please, Lena. So this is 7 years later. So where are we now in the country? So outside of Japan, South Africa is the largest issuer of integrated reports. At the last count, I think it's over 500 reports that are issued annually. And it's predominantly from our corporates, those companies that are listed on the stock exchange. King 3 has since been updated. We now have King 4, which was released in November 2016, and it's effective for financial years commencing April 2017. And in the third quarter of 2017, the JSE also updated its listing requirements, replacing King 3 with King 4. SAICA is still part of the King Committee. We participate in updating the governance codes. And a few points that I want to mention around King 4, in that it borrows very heavily from the integrated reporting framework, with concepts such as value creation, outcomes, outputs, integrated thinking, and integrated reporting. One of the key changes from King 3 to King 4, other than the apply and explain, is that it emphasizes sustainable development, corporate citizenship, meaning that companies are part of a community and not standalone enterprises, and stakeholder inclusivity rather than shareholder centricity. So the main reporting companies or organizations in the country, as I mentioned, are the listed on the stock exchange, the largest state-owned enterprises, some metros in the country, so cities like Johannesburg and Cape Town issue integrated reports, and a handful of non-profit organizations. So the big gap in our market and in the country is the small to medium enterprises, the public sector, so like our municipalities, and a large majority of our non-profits. And I'll pick on the SMMEs in a bit. So the quality of our reporting has evolved over the years. So when you look at the reports, it ranges from truly integrated reports, which reflect integrated thinking of the companies, to those that do resemble what we would term as combined reports, where you have individual sections discussing environmental issues in one, social impact in another, and the financials in a third section, without any real connectivity across the various sections. So when you look at good reports, what you see is the evolution of the thinking of the management, the various iterations that the company has gone through to reflect the refinement, for example, their business model, because in the first year you don't get your business model right. It also displays the connectivity information, and one of the nice things that we do see in South African reporting is conciseness to a degree, where there's been quite a bit of innovation and creativity around the use of graphics and pictograms to try and bring in a lot of information in a succinct manner as possible. So you'll see the two graphs that I have on the slide are from the two main reporting awards that we have in the country that's run annually. One's from EY and the other is Inkonki, and Inkonki is a mid-sized auditing advisory firm in the country. So both these awards look at the top 100 listed companies on the stock exchange and the big state-owned entities. So if you look at the graphs, you'll notice that the quality of the standard of the reporting has started to stagnate over the last few years. So although we do have very good reporters in the country, it seems that we've reached some sense of complacency around integrated reports, that companies tend to follow a formula and almost tick a box. And we confirmed some of these findings last year with and Laura mentioned this, the IRC's implementation feedback. We ran quite a few sessions across the country, and we had a range of stakeholders from corporate reporters, report users, assurance providers, and consultants. And what they were seeing was that there's a tendency to almost move to a checklist. So using the framework as a list and working through it and ticking it off to make sure that you could call your report an integrated report because you've applied all the guiding principles of the content elements. So some of the other feedback from the companies were that they were still struggling with certain concepts. So integrated thinking has now become a challenge. The capitals model, what does that actually mean? Comparability across and within sectors, and reporting fatigue. South African companies pretty much participate in integrated reporting, sustainability reporting, financial reporting, the FTSE for Good, Dow Jones, CDP, you name it, a lot of these companies participate, and there is some struggle around how to work around all of these reporting frameworks. So although as a country we have come quite a distance, I mean, we've had 7 years to go through various iterations and learnings, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but there are a host of good reporters out there which you can use and work from, but I still believe that we have a lot of work to do because we are missing certain sectors like the SMMEs and public sector. Next slide, please, Kalina. So some of the challenges that we faced over the years and we currently face, and the one, this is as SAICA, from a SAICA perspective. So the one that I don't think you're ever going to get away from, whether you're starting on an integrated reporting journey, whether it's producing your own integrated report, or helping your members understand and becoming aware and being educated around area integration reports, or like us, many years down the line, is resourcing. Staffing, funding, and time to get to everything is a challenge and is always going to be a challenge. You are competing within the organization. I am competing with a number of other priorities, imperatives, projects. What does help is that I have the support of the CEO and our executive. They understand why we do this and why it's important for our members to understand all the underlying concepts and where integrated reporting is going. SAICA still has other objectives and imperatives which I have to compete with. I think your job is made much harder if you do not have that CEO, board, or executive buy-in. And if that's not there, I would suggest spending some time to demonstrate the business case around integrated reports and integrated reporting. I'm kind of hopeful I'm getting half a body in about 3 months. One of the drivers that might help in convincing the executive is the role of the future of the accountant. So a number of PAOs and bodies are working at looking at what is the future of an accountant? What is the future accountant going to look like? So we do have a project that is looking at the future role. It's called the CA 2025 program, and preliminary results indicate that integrated thinking is one of the key skills that a future accountant is going to require. So another thing to consider is partnering to try and relieve or alleviate your staffing or funding challenges, is looking at like-minded organizations who are trying to achieve the same goal as you are around integrated reporting and partnering with them to try, whether it's education or awareness or training or lobbying, work with organizations, because then you would be able to achieve some of those goals that you were trying to. The next challenge that we are trying to deal with is communication. So we have a number of projects that are looking at very different aspects other than integrated reporting. So, for example, we've endorsed the TCFD recommendations, and in the country, the carbon tax has been approved, which will come into place next year. And we're also launching some work around the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we believe all of this links to a capital of the 6 capitals model, which will help accountants in the country and our members understand these underlying concepts to produce better reports, make better decisions. But what we are challenged with is that even though we have various communication channels, social media, online, digital magazines, printed media, events, workshops, webinars, we are not always reaching our audience in that, yes, we get to them, but they don't see or understand why we're trying to get the message across. So we are really looking at how we target our audience. So for example, the work that we're going to do around the Sustainable Development Goals, we have, with our marketing department, looking at a very targeted social media campaign around the SDGs, looking specifically at the millennials. So the only suggestion I have here is be creative, be innovative in how you communicate, because you also have to understand that the accountants and the members that you do want to reach, it's information overload out there.
Sure.
You are competing with a lot of other bodies who are trying to give them information, and they don't always have the time to read what you want them to read. Education is key, and I've split it to pre-qualification and post-qualification because each has its own challenges. I think from a post-qualification perspective, where you have accountants who've gone through the process, they've earned their qualification, it might be easier to target because of the ongoing professional development, and they have to maintain their points. So I think you can run a number of awareness and training courses for your members. And here again, it's partnering. So if you don't have the capacity to, I know that the IIRC has accredited or licensed training providers, and you can reach out to them on integrated reporting. The challenge for us is the pre-qualification. I think we're in an enviable position because we can influence our universities and the firms in that we do have a say in the curriculum. So those students who are studying for their board exams, doing their articles, before they get in and pass and become qualified chartered accountants, we can influence that whole process. But that being said, there is a challenge because when you speak to the various lecturers, whether it's in tax or accounting, each one believes that their section is more important than the other section and it cannot be removed from the curriculum. So, you know what, we can't make space for sustainability or non-financial reporting or any of these concepts. So there are a couple of projects underway in the country and globally from what I understand. But if you are able to influence the process or lobby in your country, you must try, because you have to prepare the kids that are going through this process. I mean, they are the future. We have to better prepare them so that when they come out of the process, it's not just financials that they understand or are aware of. And lastly, it's around the approach, and I borrowed the carrot versus stick from a KPMG report. I think in South Africa, we were lucky to a certain degree because things were changing in the country and our corporate governance code was evolving. And we had a number of forward-looking people who got together and who started driving this change. And that's how integrated reporting came through. And then you have your stock exchange, which just lent its weight, and then integrated reports just took off. So the thing to remember, though, is to have an understanding of the culture of your country. So corporates in South Africa are very compliance-driven. So if there is a legislative or regulatory requirement, they are going to tick that box. So it is a balance, I believe, between voluntary and mandatory. And you need to look at what would incentivize or whether taxes would drive the behavior. And I think be careful with the taxes because, for example, we've had the carbon tax discussion going on for over 5 years, probably longer, and it's only going to come into effect next year, even though we are trying and we have signed on to the Paris Agreement and we've been proponents of a low carbon economy. So look for the organizations that can help you to see whether you can achieve the advocacy and the lobbying to achieve this goal. So next slide, please, Kalina.
3 minutes.
I promise I'm almost done. It's my last slide.
Good.
So our approach is really around. So okay, one step back. What we are trying to achieve is that we want our members and these accountants to make good business decisions. And we believe that for them to be able to, they need to have a sound understanding of more than just financial aspects. And our responsibility is to give that sound understanding because we can't get it through the curriculum right now, but how do we reach everyone so that they understand environmental and social impacts and challenges beyond just purely the financial implications. So the way we do this is through advocacy, lobbying, raising awareness, partnering, and collaborating. We don't go into training specifically, but purely from a capacity perspective, and there are a number of training providers out there that we partner with. And I have given some examples of the advocacy and lobbying, but from a collaboration perspective, and maybe that would help from a PAO perspective as well. We have in the past few years assisted PAOs in reviewing their integrated reports just to share some of our learnings and the mistakes that we've made so that you don't necessarily have to repeat the mistakes that we've gone through. And we've held a number of awareness sessions with PAOs around the globe, sharing the experiences, unpacking some of the issues around the integrated reporting framework, so that you get some of the practical insights that may help in your own journey. And the last message that I actually want to leave is, it doesn't matter where you are, just start, because it is a journey. So thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Loshni. I guess you can all join me in giving a hand for the valuable information you've shared with us. Very practical in terms of what SAICA has done. And I'm sure that information would help many other bodies that are participating today. I will go back to my three colleagues and ask them one question each, and then we can go back and give another opportunity to the participants to raise any question. So Stathis, I'll start with you, Ali. I've heard this story about, you mentioned briefly on integrated thinking, and Pior, you also talked a bit of the integrated thinking. And there's a lot of stories saying integrated thinking is more important because then you only deal with reporting later on. So I want you to, assuming there are some people here who are participating in these sessions, they are board members, and they would like to understand a bit on the concept of integrated thinking and how they can start applying that at their board level before they even move to a process of reporting using integrated reporting. So can you just explain briefly about that integrated thinking concept and its applicability?
Sure, Patrick. I think we should just start by saying I think integrated thinking and reporting are two sides of the same coin, and I think ultimately the change in behaviour, mindset, and the decision making towards a more to a more long term perspective happens through the thinking, and that thinking sort of works at various levels, but I think importantly it starts with leadership thinking about in the context of their strategy and their business model, and how they interact with their different stakeholders, whether it's their suppliers or their employees, partners, etc. What capitals are important for the business, those inputs into their company, into their business model, and those capitals are sometimes called critical resources, whatever you want to call them, but there are so many things that could be critical to the long-term success of an organization. So so you start, I think, with that focus on what is significant in relation to value creation from that multi-capitals perspective, and it really depends on the kind of business or organization you are. And so quite clearly an extractive industry will have a specific set of significant issues that relate to the ability to create value over time, such as their relationship with local communities, on the social side, to on the financial side, the price of whatever, the commodity prices of whatever you're digging out of the ground or extracting. So there are probably, I would say, for most companies, 5 to 10, really very important, if you like, critical things that will impact their ability to create value in the financial sense, but also in terms of their intangibles, those intangible assets that are not reflected on the balance sheet. And so the whole process of integrated thinking then is taking into account those other opportunities and risks, if you like, and the connectivity and interdependencies between those various areas, and the company's ability to create value over time. And then the information that one needs to understand those areas, and upon which to make decisions about how to invest or to protect and make those different areas of the organisation flourish. So I would say that, to me, that's really what integrated thinking about, and I think the holy grail for a lot of organisations, which is very difficult to reach, of course, because large organisations in particular, not so much the smaller organisations, is to break down silos between different parts of the organisation, which often exist, and so integrated thinking can lead to bringing greater connectivity between different parts of the organisation, and hopefully a better common understanding through the lens of the business model and the strategic objectives of the organisation, what actually is really important to focus on. And so I think for me, that's what really integrated thinking is about. Now, I'm always personally inspired every time I hear Mervyn King, who's the obviously the person who develops the corporate governance arrangements in South Africa that Loshni said are very much based on integrated reporting. I'm very inspired by Mervyn every time he talks about how the notion of how a company in the 21st century has to be a global citizen, and ultimately I think that's what we're working towards, is companies and their leaders having a sense of purpose that's beyond driving financial performance and earnings and share price in the short term.
Thank you very much. I also, to add to your notion, I sit in boards, and I think we've ended up creating the process that integrated thinking is how we build a culture at the board level in terms of our agenda, ensuring that our decision-making process is integrated on how we create value using all those 6 capitals to have impact not just on our immediate stakeholders, but the wider stakeholders in the short term, medium term, and the long term. So for whoever is listening into this process, or all the participants, I think integrated thinking has to apply from the company point of view in that decision-making process, and what comes out of it, then you can report through the integrated report. So Laura, back to you. I guess majority of the participants have not gone through or are in the infancy stage of understanding integrated reporting. We provide them with a lot of information today, but I'm sure some of the countries here, they don't have the expertise, or they don't even have the knowledge on how they can promote this, especially if they were to face a stock exchange or the government in their respective countries. So just wanted you to share some few thoughts on how can they practically build that knowledge in the country and the expertise, and the type of messages, or where they can find the messages that they can use for their policy discussion with the stakeholders.
Patrick. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Laura.
Could you just repeat the last part of that question? I didn't quite catch that. It was the connection's not great.
So the first one, it's a country says we don't have expertise in the country on integrated reporting at all.
Yeah.
So what are the practical ways that we can use to develop that expertise in the country? But secondly, if we want to influence our government or policymakers, what key messages, or where can we access key messages that we can use to reach out to the policymakers? And I know a number of countries, people are struggling to think of what are those key messages to share with the policymakers. Okay,
great. I'd say in terms of resources and sort of getting an understanding of what integrated reporting is, I mean, I went through some resources earlier. As a starting point, I would look at the IFC's website, and as I said, with their technical program, they're developing guidance, they're developing frequently asked questions. They have the examples database to have a look at some examples of integrated reports. And also on the IFAC's website, we've got various publications, the Global Knowledge Gateway. There's a lot of material out there on integrated reporting. I know the big 4 firms produce a lot of thought leadership around it. And also other PAOs where integrated reporting is maybe more advanced in their countries. I would have a look at publications, from other accountancy bodies. I'd say there is a lot of information out there, and as I say, I think kind of being involved in different networks, so such as the PAO network or other networks within the country, I think that's also a good way of getting a better understanding of IR and what others are doing and learning from experiences from others around the globe. I was going to say that in terms of on the regulatory side and endorsing and promoting with regulators with stock exchanges, again, I think you're going to cover the Africa Integrated Reporting Committee, but any sort of multi-stakeholder group like that, where you can kind of raise these issues with the various participants that cover a wide range of stakeholders. I think that's quite a good mechanism to sort of get everybody in this on the same way of thinking. I think including integrated reporting in submissions to governments and regulatory authorities and any relevant policy areas, that it is a really useful way to try and get regulatory endorsement for integrated reporting. I think the message itself will vary depending on jurisdiction, depending on the status of corporate reporting in a particular country. I'd say, Stathis mentions IFAC policy position paper, and I would say organisations are welcome to utilise that and look at the key messages within that. That's IFAC's position, but the paper itself covers sort of an overview of the corporate reporting landscape and the various standards and frameworks globally, and looking at some of the challenges of the fragmented system. And then it also considers the relationships between the different reporting frameworks and IFAC's position on how using integrated reporting, a more coherent reporting system can be achieved. So I think, as a starting point, if organisations are not aware of kind of what their messaging is or what their policy is, that's a good sort of background to have a look at that. And like I say, you're welcome to utilise that along with your own policies to kind of raise with stock exchanges, with regulators. I also mentioned the Q&A document that we recently published last month. I think that kind of builds on our policy position a little bit and kind of digs a little deeper into some of the common questions that we get around integrated reporting. So I think that's maybe a useful resource as a starting point as well.
Thank you for that valuable information. And if I can add some more thoughts that you can also consider, if you have a country and you don't have the knowledge and you're building it so far, you may also start thinking of whether, as a PAO, you can start a committee of people who are interested in this area. And through that committee, then you can start reaching out to the existing information. There's a lot of information and it's very confusing, I would say that. So if you form a committee and you need someone to guide you, that's when you join and call Stathis in terms of knowledge. You call Karina on the guidance of which information become pertinent. So committee is one way. Secondly, you may think within the PAO, you can look for someone who is responsible for this area, like Loshni has stated. And doesn't need to be someone who is on a permanent basis. Someone can be on a part-time basis. You can think of a lecturer in a university. So provided you get someone who has the interest, and through that interest, they can start building that knowledge in your PAO. And on the messages side, yes, I like what Rola has spoken about. There is valuable information, but someone needs to understand that information. So when you're engaging with the policymaker, at least you have a way to pass the message and they understand it. Because if you're not clear, then it becomes very difficult for those stakeholders to understand the question. We'll come back to you shortly, and I'll ask the final question for this round to Loshni. Assuming there is a company that wants to start implementing IR, just from SAICA point of view, how have you been supporting a company to implement integrated reporting?
So we are challenged in a way that we don't provide consulting services. So if a company comes and says, could you please help me with an integrated report, we can't directly engage in helping them produce one, because that would mean that we compete with our members.
Yeah.
So what we find in the country, we've got the big four, so to EY, KPMG, and a few of the smaller, medium-sized firms like Nkonki, Mzaz, and Grant Thornton have their own sustainability integrated reporting advisory and assurance service teams. So they provide reporting services to different companies, so that so we can't compete with them. What we do for our members who work in companies, and it might be a CFO who's responsible for the integrated reporting, we provide them with events, workshops, awareness around developments, concepts, to make them aware of this is where they need to go, these are the things they need to consider, and how do you move the whole conversation around integrated reporting forward. And maybe to add on to this for the PAO specifically is to leverage those relationships with your accounting auditing firms in the country.
Good.
So that's why we partner quite extensively with with the big four, our small and medium-sized firms, to try and move the conversation. And I'll give you an example. So one of the gaps I mentioned is the small to medium enterprises in the country. So we're planning an event in August this year, and Nazars has a team who has a small to medium enterprises has produced a report, and we're working with them to try and develop a business case to try and convince SMEs in the country this is why reporting on more than just your financial information is so important. So use those networks, partner with the right people to try and help your companies in a very indirect way. So that's how we go about it.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for that information. Okay, over back to you once again, participants. Anyone who has a question, comment, just unmute and raise your question.
Hi there. A quick one from Georgia. Can we?
Yes, go on.
Yes, we were just wondering if you guys are aware of any credible research of how integrated reporting or strategic reporting affects the capital marketplace. So, like any correlation with cost of funds or cost of capital, or any similar stuff. That would be helpful. Thanks.
Stathis, I think you had some. Do you have any of these that you can report back on?
Yes, Stathis? I may need. Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you. Thank you. Continue.
Yes, no, that's a good question, and one that's asked quite frequently. That I can't cite them now, but there are one or two sources of academic research that show the linkage between integrated reporting, and I use that loosely because sometimes it also relates to sustainability reporting and the impact that has on the success of a company and its ability over the long term to create returns for its investors. But I don't have them with me listed now, but there are. I think it's about two, I would say, credible academic pieces of work so far, and I expect more to come online later on, because it's a difficult area to research because there's a bit of a lag. So it takes, the sample size and the way one looks at this has to take place over a number of years. So, but I don't know whether Loshni or Laura indeed may know those. Two or three reference points off the top of their head, but I think it's something we can circulate afterwards.
Okay, let's do that. Maybe we'll share it with Karina and can share that information. And at the same time, if the document you talked about from SAICA, we could also share that through you, Karina, and you can distribute. In Africa, we have what's called Pan-African Federation of Accountants, and last year we hosted also an African Congress of Accountants, and we managed to get into a partnership with the Association for Academics who do research within the Africa region, and we encouraging them to partner with the accountancy profession to do the research. And the research they did last year, 2 of those papers were also focused on this area, but they were looking at the impact of sustainability reporting on the share prices of company, and this was mainly in Nairobi Stock Exchange, and the Nigeria Stock Exchange. And they could see there is a link of improvement on that. We've told them to refresh and add some more meat into that research work. So if it comes out, once again, I will also share that with you, Karina, and we can take it forward. If there's anyone sitting in and participating today and you're in academic, I guess one can also think of how to join and participate in this agenda, because this information is important to see the link. So for people participating, as Loshni mentioned, in Africa, the 54 countries, only South Africa has adopted integrated reporting. And you could hear very clearly the drive for it was from the governance perspective. We have what's referred to as Pan-African Federation of Accountants. So in 2011, we realized as the accountancy profession needs to work together to share resources, to share knowledge. And through PAFA, we've been implementing different initiatives through a number of partners. So this agenda is important, and we felt that integrated reporting should also be raised higher within the region, and many countries need to start adopting it. So what did we do? So PAFA and WorldBank, we've entered into an initiative, or thought of an initiative, which we housed in the PAFA strategy of forming what refers to Africa Integrated Reporting Committee. And the purpose of this committee essentially is also to promote and support implementation of the reform in the African region. And our target is at least 5 countries will be on IR by 2020. So what is the approach that we followed? Simply, we say this agenda should be driven by the accountancy profession in the region, and we realized we can't do the accountancy profession alone. So the next target was the stock exchange, because just following the model of South Africa. And we created a committee and asked which countries should participate, because we couldn't bring everyone else on board. And we just used a criteria. The criteria was simply to look for countries where there is maturity of the accountancy profession, there's maturity in terms of corporate reporting, and there is a strong stock exchange. And we have the 8 countries which have listed in that group, which is in your slide. And those countries, we formed this committee, started last year. And in operating, we also said we need to bring observers at regional and global level who are involved in IR to support us, to guide us, and to provide us with information. And that includes IFAC, International Integrated Reporting Council, the African Union, or under regions, or the regional economic groupings, and we have housed this institution at PAFA. So we've started some initiatives, and that's what I'm showing you on the right, and we are happy that some of that main one was we recommended that each and every country to start their own integrated reporting committee. Some have been formed so far, similar to South Africa, because that will bring the stakeholders at the country level to drive the agenda, and they will get a lot of information from us. And we've helped to prepare a guiding document on how to establish those committees and how they would operate. And we've shared this with Stathis in IFAC and the IRC, and the aim is that that paper can be adopted and be used globally. And then we're trying to do a lot of advocacy. You can see a number of things that we want to prepare there. We're doing a baseline study on financial and non-financial reporting within the region, and we are partnering with the University of Cape Town to do that. We're preparing a roadmap on how to prepare integrated reporting, planning our first conference for Africa Integrated Reporting in Africa region in May, and many other aspects that comes on board. So the whole essence is small group to promote and advocate implementation of integrated reporting within the region, and we're just going to show leadership, and we hope with time the other countries will come on board. So also within your region, you can consider, can this concept be adopted, besides just thinking about the country level to share the resources. So that was the essence. And we've given you a link to a small article that we prepared on what we are engaged in this topic. So Kalina, you've accepted. We've done a lot, so we may just have more 30 minutes. So I want to stop here on this session and thank Loshni, thank Stathis, and thank Rolla for their information they have shared so far. And we can move into the next session. And I invite all of you, let's give a round of applause to them. Thank you to you. We can't see them. So, Matteo, we come over to you. Yes, IFAC have also prepared a guide for the SME, applicability of integrated reporting to the SME. And without wasting a lot of time, let's invite Matteo to share with us what is included in integrated thinking and its applicability for small and medium enterprises. Over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Jumbo to you and to anyone.
I think you all got it well. Well done.
Thank you for having invited me to just to express and to share some comments on the adoption of integrated reporting for SMEs. I am a member of the Small and Medium Practices Committee in IFAC, and I'm a member from 2017, even if I have been studying integrated reporting even from before. So it's a pleasure to me to share with you some consideration I've been experiencing during this time. Also because I have applied a couple of times the adoption of integrated reporting in small companies, or better, small entities. So I would like to share with you my considerations and to understand if they are consistent with yours. So the IFAC SMP made a publication on August 2017. I hope you can see it. It's called Creating Value for SMEs Through Integrated Thinking. And then there's a title, The Benefits of Integrated Reporting. So it's important just to understand what is covered by this in publication. It's more or less 10 pages. What are the main topics included in this publication? You can see the different bullets in the slide. So the first point is just concerned how an explanation on how and why SMEs create value. So it's focused on an understanding of the creation of value over the time by SMEs. Then there are some considerations inherent to the promotion of integrated thinking, because this publication is more dedicated to integrated thinking than to integrated report. Or better, I remember that just at the beginning of the publication of the framework by IARC, which is co-author of this publication, in substance, there was a debate about the terminology to be used in this context. So we talk about integrated thinking, we talk about integrated reporting and integrated report. Integrated report is the external output of a long process within the organization, which is probably the most relevant part of the approach in itself. And this is true for big companies, but especially for SMEs, where managerial instruments are not always so sophisticated. So in this context, probably integrated reporting, in general term, an integrated approach, can be a benefit for an organization which can have the chance, the opportunity to reconsider its strategy at the light of different considerations from a different perspective from before. So the promotion of integrated thinking is very important in this perspective. If you can see just the picture of the publication, you can understand that integrated thinking is related to a better understanding of the entity, while the integrated report is more related to a better communication. So the first one is the internal process, the second one is the external output of the internal process. In this application, in the application of the integrated approach, obviously an SME, as all the other entities, has to analyze the multiple capitals. If you see the publication, you can just have a look of the of the capitals which are included, or better, which can be included in an SME context, financial capital, such as the equity, debts, and grants available to an SME. Factored capital as or the tangible structure which an SME possesses in order to produce value over the time. Intellectual capital, including the knowledge, intellectual property systems and processes that an SME owns. Human capital meant has the skills, experience, and motivation that employees and management in SME possess. Social and relationship capital, brands, and reputation in the community where the SME operates with. And natural capital has an access to environmental resources from the side of an SME. So I would say that if you are an SMP, which is the target, the main target of this publication, you have to consider if there are more benefits than cost in applying the integrated approach. So Kalina, next slide, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, Matteo, we hear you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I can see the slide now. So you have just to understand, if you are an SME, for example, if you have an SME as a client, you have to understand which are the benefits and which are the costs, obviously, in applying the integrated reporting approach in order to understand which is the trade-off between cost and benefits. What are the benefits you can just identify in approaching the integrated approach? As you can see from the slide, improving internal management processes, break down silos, as we understood from previous speeches. So in this case, you can determine innovative managerial model, just in order, for example, among the other things, to attract and to maintain talents, because as you know, millennials meant as potential employers of your entity can be attracted by entities which are more innovative than the average level of the market. You can enhance decision making and business planning, so you can reconsider and to refresh your strategic purposes and your strategy in general terms, just at the light of new considerations and new expressions of the connectivity between the analysis of the operation you can make and the results from a different point of view than before. You can enhance your credibility in the market, especially because you should implement a new process of management where stakeholders are included in this process. So this can be a critical issue for SMEs, and probably integrated reporting is more oriented to entities with a range of stakeholders, or with a potential range of stakeholders, and this is another aspect you should consider when you talk about integrated reporting with SMEs. And then you have to think about the storytelling of your entity. So for example, if your intention is just to transfer or to express the real value, not only the financial value of your company, probably in integrated reporting and an integrated report is a good way to communicate the value of your entity, even if the entity is a small one. Next slide, please, Kalina. As I mentioned before, thanks. As I mentioned before, the potential for integrated thinking and integrated reporting is focused upon, from our perspective, SMPs. SMPs are probably trusted advisors. You can find some publication in the Gateway platform where it is explained, I would say, in a very good way, the relation that the client can have with an SMP, just in order to implement an integrated approach. If you can see to the 2016 IFAC Global SMP Survey, you can find what is explained in the slide, that 83% of SMPs provided some form of business advisory, and that in this connection, in the perception of the respondents of the survey, the main line of, I would say, services for the future was seen just in strategic and future advisory services. So in this context, probably just more than audit and assurance, tax accounting compilation, accountants can see just in advisory services a main challenge for the future. And I would say that integrated reporting and thinking can be obviously included in this field. From this point of view, it is quite obvious that professional accountant probably is the best person for the job, I would say, because probably he has got the skills in order to implement a new strategic and managerial tool in order then to communicate even externally, which is the real value of the orientation and the value of the time. Next slide, please. What is the potential target of the potential clients? Thank you, Karina. The potential clients for the application of integrated reporting, if we talk about obviously always SMEs. As I mentioned before, it's likely to go to look for companies, even if small, with a wide network of external and internal stakeholders. Obviously, when we talk about internal stakeholders, we relate more to integrated thinking. Internal stakeholders are, for instance, directors, are employers, are other people involved internally in the process of our SME. While when we talk about external stakeholders, we refer probably to funders, to the community where the SME act in, and all the other people which can consider as relevant the communication made by our SME. If we look at the sectors probably more involved in this process, you can find in the slide some considerations about some instances. Obviously, the list is not exhaustive, but it's only including some examples of entities which can be quite adaptable, or better, where integrated thinking can be a good process to be implemented in. If you think about companies, for example, and entities providing public services, don't know, I'm thinking about kindergartens, schools. There's a wide range of stakeholders. There's a wide community which can be involved in the process of management as well, and which are interested not only in financial performance, but also in other operation and other creation of the so-called multiple capitals in a connective way, and just considering all the relation between the creation and the decrease of the different capitals included in our entities. Then you can think about local utilities, not in Italy, for example, where utilities are composed of very big companies, but in some other context, geographical context, local utilities, for example, for providing water or other services are including small companies. Professional services firms, where you have interest not only in financial performance, but also in other kind of performance. So if you can have a look at the key factors included in the process of the internal process of creation of value of these entities, obviously you can have additional information about the potential of the entity itself. Freight companies, where environmental elements are sensible and particularly relevant. And last, I would say, but not least, not-for-profit organization. As you know, previously some speakers before me mentioned public sector organizations. Not-for-profit organizations are mission-driven entities, so they are not oriented to create for their nature a profit. They are destined to just to pursue a specific mission. So it is just included in the concept of not-for-profit organization the orientation to obtain not only financial performance, but also to create and to push a specific mission. So integrated reporting and integrated report in this specific context can be a very good tool to communicate the activity, not only from a financial perspective, but also for other kinds of perspectives. Next slide, please, Karina. So integrated reporting is connected to satisfy the information needs of specific stakeholders. Previously, I had the very interesting consideration about the relation between financial performance and the adoption of integrated reporting. Probably it's a very difficult question to respond to. An academic as well, so I'm just included in a process of one of this kind of research. And I have to say that the variables and the parameters and the elements which can impact on the creation of an integrated report have to be well studied before to produce such a research, because the orientation to produce an integrated report, because I would say that in this context this is the first reference in order to evaluate if there is a relation between the financial performance and the production of someone which can be externally disseminated, is very difficult. However, if you look at a buyer, as I said before, probably the consideration and the production of an integrated report can give a different perspective of your entity. Then there are some jurisdictional contexts where integrated reporting can just have some financing advantages. So, for example, you can have, as in Europe, talking about non-financial information. This non-financial information can provide some advantage for the relation with banks and other capital providers. And then, if we especially think about not-for-profit organization, obviously, I would say even in this case, integrated reports can be a good tool in order to implement and to create contracts, to make an experiment, to give an idea of a global picture, I would say an exhaustive picture of your entity, in order to undertake different operations with other subjects and with other entities, with public administration and so on. So just how to implement an integrated approach with specific reference to SMEs. Probably you can follow some steps. Obviously, there is not a specific chronology. I would say there is not just an orientation or a checklist to implement in order to organize the adoption of integrated approach. But the one included in the slide is a good orientation in order to understand which are the different steps that can be included in the adoption of integrated reporting approach. Issue a statement of intent in order to make all the people involved understand what's the purpose of the process. To conduct a stakeholder mapping exercise, even in order to understand which are main stakeholders, which are our stakeholders, and this could be a good reconsideration even as a managerial tool instrument. Think about value creation. Even in this case, I would say that if you are orienting your efforts to publish an integrated report, obviously you have, as we said before, to start from integrated thinking. If you think about value creation, you are obliged in some extent to think about how to create value, which is your business model, which is your strategy. So just to make you have an example, in this context, I think it's very important to have a materiality process, or better to think which are the elements which can have an important impact in the creation of value for you and for the community. So if you have, for example, a questionnaire for your directors, it is not said that all the directors can give the same orientation to the company. So this could be just a good moment to make a reconsideration of your orientation. If you have different ideas, just internal your directors, if you have which is your idea, and just to express your idea to other internal stakeholders like employers. Consider the business model, as we said before, determine what resources are needed. We talked about this even before. And I would include in this context even the creation of a group. If you are an SME, probably you need, or better, I think you need an SMP, your professional accountant. Then your professional accountant could be the pivot in the progress of the construction of the model and of the implementation of integrated approach. But obviously you need even more skills. Like for example here, while I was listening to your previous speech, I thought about this idea. I mentioned just other skills probably you need when you think about the creation of an integrated approach. Probably you need experts in human resources, in strategy and risk, in communication, in IT services. So you have obviously, if you are a professional accountant, the competence and the skills to orient this process, but probably you need even other skills in order to have a good implementation of the process itself. Next slide, please, Kalina. Then I think I'm going not to bother you anymore in a couple of slides. Then we have where you can take resources. Laura said before, just spent some words about IFAC Global Knowledge Gateway. It's a global hub where you can have a data bank of different resources you can consider in order to implement your processes. You can talk about different topics included in integrated reporting as well. You have obviously to register to this section in order to have to can access to the different tools and articles. You have different topic areas. I have here a list of the main topic areas just in order to make you an idea. Business reporting, ethics, financial leadership and development, governance, performance and financial management, risk management, sustainability, audit and assurance, practice management and technology. So if you register on Gateway, you can take just an access to this different section and to see the different articles dedicated to the sectors you are interested in. Next slide, please. If we are looking for resources for IR on Gateway, you can have, for example, access to these different articles. Some of them are specifically dedicated to the adoption of IR to SMEs and from an SMP perspective. So, as you can see from the slide, there are different aspects which are dealt with these articles. So, if we can go on with the slides. just talking about the activity of IFAC on integrated reporting. I would like just to mention the project which IASB is going to experiment concerning the adoption of different services of assurance to emerging forms of external reporting. When we talk about emerging forms of external reporting, we are talking especially about integrated reporting, which is not the only one, but probably just a reference of this project. So the project is going to develop a non-authoritative guidance in applying just assuring services engagement, revised documentation. It has been named the Project Advisory Panel in order to support this project. And if you go on the IFAC website, you can download even a feedback statement published just probably 1 month ago, something more, probably just at the beginning of 2018, concerning and summarizing the responses of this consultation paper published in 2016. Some of the key messages included in this feedback statement concerns that the fact that probably taking into consideration the responses from stakeholders, the current demand for assurance, for this kind of assurance, is limited, but it's going to evolve during the future years. So it's a good field to be implemented and to be considered for future documentation. There's the strong agreement, as mentioned in the slide, to produce a non-authoritative guidance, but just to work on the existing documents published by the IAASB, and just to consider to deal with this issue. And so, just the last consideration about IFAC resources in the next slide. If we can see the next slide, so please, thank you, Karina. You can see the different way you can have to communicate, to express your opinion about the projects, the ongoing projects, even concerning, not only, but even concerning integrated reporting published by IFAC. You can join us, our group in LinkedIn, in Twitter, in another sort of social media. You can get the access to the Global Knowledge Gateway. And just I would like to ask you, just being on the time applied to my speech, just in order to express a final consideration in the adoption of the integrated approach. If you are an SME, probably it's quite onerous just to be compliant with all the different requirements of the framework of IAARC. But even if you are not implemented in a full and exhaustive way, that all the single consideration of the framework, which is in any case a principle-based document, as you know better than me probably, the potential benefits for SMEs can be very important, because as we mentioned before, this is an approach, so it can be a managerial tool, a strategic tool, more than an external way to communicate your performance. And in all the cases, the importance is just to implement it, to give, even if you are talking about an external communication, just to provide the stakeholders with an exhaustive idea of the picture of your SME. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matteo, and I guess we all applaud you once again for that useful information on integrated thinking and IR in SME. The good concept. I think Loshni had started alluding to that fact on how it can be implemented in the small and medium enterprises. I know we were supposed to finish now, all participants, but I've spoken to Kalina, and we just to offer you an opportunity to raise any questions that you may have on this session. So at least 15 more minutes, and then we'll be done. So in case you have any thoughts or comments that you want to raise now, over to you, just unmute. And Matteo, as we wait for those questions, I would also ask you to share with us an example of a PAO that's currently supporting SMEs to implement integrated thinking and integrated reporting. So if you know of an example, so what type of support they're offering and the resources that they have developed so far.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I think that probably the response can be different from a jurisdictional context to another one, because if you don't have a statutory requirement to apply IR, as in many geographical contexts, your organization can give you some examples, even starting from education and from training. So I have in my mind some examples of professional organizations, giving some roots about, first of all, the identification and the concept, first level, I would say, of what integrated reporting is. And then another way to communicate just what integrated reporting is to express and to talk with some people already applying integrated reporting. So, for example, I have in my mind some conferences where the main speakers are people implementing integrated reporting, thinking about the different impact on internal processes, what this meant about this meant in the perspective of people internally working, in terms of governance, in terms of strategy, in terms of benefits and cost of the application of integrated reporting. So probably this is just the first consideration. Another consideration I can just propose is the adoption, and as an example of integrated reporting in the form of integrated report. So I think about professional organizations already published their own integrated reports. So if you want to make your people, your community, to understand what an integrated report is, what integrated reporting is, probably it's a good idea just to make them touch what an integrated report is. So what is the final output of this process? Once they can understand what their organizations can make by reading integrated report, probably they have the good skills, the technical skills in order to make another integrated report by their own.
Just thank you, Matteo, for the information that you shared. Very appreciative. I think it's an introduction to the IR and integrated thinking in SME. And the presentation has valuable information on resource material that we can refer to later on. And we really appreciate it. So we give our hand of applause to you too for that presentation. So Kalina, from my end, I think I can say that's a conclusion on the information we were to receive from the presenters today. You have a good understanding of, or a bit of understanding of what IR is about, the why and the what, and from IFAC having presented that to us. Secondly, I think there's a good base of information on what the professional accountancies can do on promoting, on influencing and supporting IR. And the example from the initiative by IFAC, the resource material from IFAC, and what SAICA is doing provides the PAOs participating in this session with valuable reference points which they can use into the future. And what I just encourage everyone participating, if this is new, spend more time to learn more about IR. It's not an overnight thing, so just try to think of infrastructure mechanism at individual and the PAO or firm level on how to understand more. And secondly, start thinking of how you can challenge and engage with your policymakers to start adopting integrated reporting in your respective country. And I say this could be at an individual level, at a firm level, and a PAO level, because we think IR is important, it's a new way of reporting, and we all need to get there sometime. And don't forget integrated thinking, because thinking is the basis or the engine room that will help us to produce information that we include in integrated reports. So with that, just say thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to facilitate this. We'll share the information we've spoken about, and Karina, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just say a few closing remarks and a few next steps. So I would like to first thank Stathis, Laura, Loshni, and Matteo for the excellent presentations, and to thank you all for your participation in this learning event. Let me especially thank Patrick for his excellent moderation, and also thank Piotr, who is joining here with me, for his introduction to the integrated reporting key concepts. Let me mention that this distance learning event is recorded, and the edited recording will be made available at our website in due course. Let me also use this opportunity to advertise 2 upcoming events from the EU Reparis program. We have the CFRR IFAC Joint Regional Education Community of Practice that will take place in Vienna on April 11th, 2018. We also have the Trainer and Trainers workshops with a focus on services for SMEs that is scheduled for April 12th at the Joint Vienna Institute. Invitations and agendas will follow soon. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you then and reconnecting since our last meeting. Please also visit the CFRR homepage for more details on the upcoming events. Let me thank you and wish you goodbye.
Thank you very much, Karina. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.